Okay, guys. Oh no, I need to turn the microphone on. Okay. Okay, guys, we're going to get started because we've got a really full agenda tonight and we've had the usual tech dramas to get out of the way. So first up this evening, I've got Kirsty and the team back from the Learning Analytics team who are going to help you think critically about how you've been participating in the community to help you with moving forward for the rest of the semester. So I'm going to hand over to Kirsty because we've got lots to get through.
She'll be quick. We'll be quick. No, and then we'll be gone. No. All right. So, hi everyone. We're back. Let me remember how to navigate. I don't remember. Yes I do. Okay. So does everyone remember from the last time we came in, what, week 2, week 3? We were talking about cognitive presence and like how we were maybe going to use the toolkit to actually be able to identify your cognitive presence in a community of inquiry. Now, hands up, who signed up for the toolkit? Like, no obligation, but, you know, just in case you... Oh, okay. We've got heaps of data in there now. I was thinking more of you must have signed up, but it must be the externals, because I'm actually getting quite surprised at how much data we've got in there at the moment. So what we've got starting to form, I'm going to go and play around with it a bit and show you what's in there and what it's looking like at the moment. But a lot of today we're going to be trying to get you to think about your own participation in the community of inquiry that you've created in this unit from that lens, right? So you could use the data, or you could just use your own posts and you could go through and be like classifying them just manually, right? So you can go either way. But of course we'd love you to be using the toolkit because then we get more data and it's all like very exciting for us. So active research project, I'm glad it's working. Zach here will be very glad it's working. Yeah, it's been a bit erratic this semester because we've been cleaning a lot of old functionality up, and there's been a few ons and offs and things breaking and other things fixing and like, development project, you know, lovely IT development, fun games. So if you remember, we were talking about the concept of posts and like developing a stream of thought or developing sort of a configuration of a community that's constructing meaning through sustained configuration, right? Sustained communication. So this is just one way of thinking about how you're participating in a community. Has anyone found other ones while they've been going through this course? Because you could use other constructs or other, like, there's a whole heap of different ones. Anyone come across any? You don't have to search. So, for example, I read a paper recently I was reviewing that was linking, for example, Bloom's taxonomy to community of inquiry. So it was showing that, for example, the way in which you'd classify metacognition, really, in that case, links to these kind of participations in a community, which I was quite surprised with, like, off the bat, because there's no a priori reason why they should be correlated. But the data was showing that the behaviours were actually quite similar, which was kind of cool. And they actually had a couple of other frameworks in there. There's a lot of them you could use, but this is the one we have a classifier for because, you know, these guys have been working, so this is the one we're playing with. So the idea here is someone triggers a question, explore, like a group of you, maybe you would explore the issue, you'd start integrating and then you'd hit a resolution, right? That was a bit of revision from last time we talked about it more. Have you been doing that? What do you reckon? What kind of behaviour have you been displaying yourself if you think honestly about how you've been participating in say, the blog posts, in the Twitter chats? Do you reckon you've been doing it or not? Yeah?
I think it's hard to come to a resolution. I think that it's more about exploring and integrating rather than saying, oh, we've resolved that issue.
I completely agree. I think that's one of the big issues with this framework. So it's actually very rare to hit resolution.
It's not so good to do resolution anyway. It's better to always be questioning what you're...
Quite often what you'll see, though, is you go through this cycle of triggering through to resolution, and that will trigger a new thing. And so you can, if you go through and classify the thing, you can see these like phases of behaviour where people will cycle through it all and then start again, because in the resolution you have a whole set of new questions. So it can work with that. But I agree, it's very rare. Have you noticed a difference in the affordances between Twitter and WordPress in terms of that? Because that's the thing I find really fascinating. Like, Twitter is really just about triggering, right? There's very little even exploration, although you can get a little bit going on. And especially Twitter chats are kind of heading towards that kind of exploration of an issue, really, aren't they?
But afterwards there's a lot of reflection. That makes you feel more deeply about the issue, even if at the time it's just triggering.
Yep. So do you think that enters into your tweets or into your blog posts though? Yeah. So I reckon, and in fact, when we're running the classifier, we're really only running the classifier over the blog posts because, as far as we're concerned, it's broken for Twitter. It doesn't actually work for Twitter. The affordances of the medium are not very strong for it. As well, the training data sets are too different, and so the classifier is just very inaccurate if you try to apply it to Twitter data. So, we kind of just don't. So this is something to think about in the future. Okay, so thinking back that way, what have we got here? Oh, I don't know. Why won't you go forward?
Try clicking one more time.
I'm not sure that it's getting a lot of critical disagreements.
Ah, that's a good question. Yeah.
It's moving here.
Oh, wait up. What's going on?
That's weird. You keep talking, I'll play.
Okay. That's interesting. So one of the things I noticed, so when Zach was doing his honours thesis, which was when I came across this framework, because that was when he started building a classifier for cognitive presence, the community of inquiry that I was looking at for, just thinking about in the context of this research, was actually a bunch of academics in the Transform program, right? So, this is a bunch of people who should be pretty good at critical discourse and inquiry and community building. And it was a bunch of people who are known for innovative teaching. So Kate was in there. There were a whole heap of us in there. But the community was kind of dominated by a couple of people who were just posting a whole heap of stuff all the time. And everyone was so overwhelmed with the amount of content that no one was actually reflecting or critically analysing or building an argument around it. And once I learned about the framework and started applying that to this particular community, it actually changed how I was interacting with it, because it brought me into a much more reflective mode about, well, wait a minute, that's not what's we're meant to be actually critically engaging with each other here and building up some sort of a shared understanding. And if we're not responding to each other's posts, how could that possibly happen? So I agree, it's actually, even for people who are meant to be expert in this stuff, it's very hard to get into a very strong community of inquiry kind of behaviour mechanism. It takes a lot of very active kind of reasoning and intervention, I think, in terms of how you approach that. But sometimes you wouldn't want to, right?
So I think some people are really good at asking a question based on the blog post and sharing things.
Yep.
And I think that's coming through really well. What I don't see, because I don't know how to do it respectfully, is to respectfully disagree.
Oh, I think that's a good skill to learn, though.
It is, and I'm still
Yeah. So do you notice what I just did there? You can respectfully disagree, but yeah, no, I agree, and it's quite a hard skill to learn. I agree. So it can actually be, oh, we have totally gone. Bye-bye. No, it's all right. So one of the things you do find is, I think academics are quite poor at respectfully disagreeing, but they're very strong at critically disagreeing with each other. So you will see different types of people quite often displaying different behaviours just according to their norms. So I had a collaborator here who works a lot with someone at Carnegie Mellon University a while back. So he's at Texas. And he was telling me how her whole school is just so unbelievably critical that she's actually offending people that she works with that they both know, because she just hammers people. Do you even know what a network model is? Kind of questions, which are, from her perspective, very valid, but not really respecting the social norms. And that's why that social presence construct is very important, because if you've got a community where it's okay to do that, people will do that, and that will shut down discussion, won't it? So these people haven't even told her that they consider that bad form in terms of behaviour patterns. They're just not working with her anymore. So it's very important to be quite mindful about how you do these things, isn't it? Oh, what is going on? I should be watching this and learning how to do this. So you online people, you're, for the first time in your lives, at an advantage over the people who are in the classroom, probably. We'll get there. We'll get there. Wow. Oh, it's cool. I should have actually been watching. So yeah, like there's a lot of nuances in terms of how these things work, and this is why I'd be calling this a framework, right? It's just a way, it's a lens to look at your participation. It's not like a rule about how you should participate. It's not meant to be like normative in any sense. Go do. And now we do a little dance. So remember though, what we were talking about last time was, back to what you were saying before, there's different ways you might want to engage in a community, right? So it's completely valid for some people to be really strong at triggering and finding really interesting information, and for other people to be really good at answering like questions. Like that's actually really important that you have two different types of behaviours. And it's quite unrealistic to expect anyone to be able to display all of those behaviours all the time, isn't it? Right? So I think it's actually very important to be very mindful about what kind of a...
And then sometimes also the topic is more controversial than another one. So, I mean, sometimes it's just like...
Exactly, yeah.
You really can't disagree with that.
Yeah. Well, so once the topics get really controversial, it becomes much harder for some types of people to weigh in. And, like, you know, I love an argument, so I'll weigh in quite happily. But that will actually shut down other people, won't it? So I think it's very important to be very mindful about what kind of a digital trace you're leaving in these environments, and to be really aware of what your data is looking like, which is one of the reasons why we do this. Oh my God, I've got slides back. We're almost there. It's exciting. Did it just crash or what?
Yeah, I think the internet connection's really flaky over here tonight.
Oh, they don't like our internet. They don't like anything. QUT just doesn't like us. Does anyone have, so if you go online and log on to the site with your cows, potentially you could actually watch the slides and I'll just like wing it, would be one way.
I can put it on them natively. We'll just have to leave the chat. That's fine. Just give me a sec to load them.
I can keep going from like, yeah, I'll keep going from the...
Yeah, I'm just going
We
to load
could-
them natively.
Oh, okay. Now we've got slides.
Or you will have in one set. This is another one. Oh, I haven't got the extension.
Oh, no. Oh, it just gets more and more exciting.
Try on nights like this. What it's like dealing with technology.
This is that teaching with technology thing. We should actually, well, we've got the screen capture. We can like show it to Tills. This is what happens when you try to do these things.
And for the record, I'm like the most adept at this. Far out.
So this is quite a good complaint to be having. Like, Kate is one of the most adept at this. Wow.
I'm going to run it natively here.
Yeah, so why don't I just look at that computer and like play there, and then everyone else is looking. It's a good chance to sign on to the CLA Toolkit, by the way, if you're interested, because we might be using it in a little minute. No? Okay. Yeah. No, it's not compulsory. All we're doing is giving you dashboards and data that you can use to try and understand what's going on. That's all. Well, so what kind of behaviour you're exhibiting. So I'll show you some of these dashboards in a minute, if we ever get our slides back. So this is much more about just data literacy at this point in time, but the rollout for this will be more generic. So essentially, as it develops, so it's a work in progress at the moment, but as it develops, it'll roll out across QUT. So if anyone's using, say, Twitter in their teaching, and they want their students to be able to look at data or records of what they've been doing, then this would be a tool that they can pull into their teaching. So because students only sign up, right, there's a really nice privacy model that comes in. So you don't have to sign up. That's the whole point, right? So that's... So these are like educational constructs that have been developed over a long time, and then essentially what we use is machine learning to actually run the classifier. But the thing we're going to do in a minute is get you to actually correct the classifier, because the classifiers are wrong. So this is where you use artificial intelligence. So essentially the computer spots patterns in the text and works out what's going on, and that's how it classifies. So it doesn't actually like restrict you. So essentially all it is a report that this is what the machine thinks your behaviour is, which may be right and it may be wrong. Like, so think about Amazon, right? So think about, you know, when Amazon tells you what books you should read? That's a similar, so that's that kind of process. This would tell you how you're engaging in the community in this case. Like, but, you know, these are just tools. So a lot of this is around trying to learn if you find that useful. If you don't, that's just as good a critique, right? Yeah. So that's useful to us. Okay, what are we up to? Were we up to that, or were we up to? Oh, yeah. So this was a slide we showed last time. All right, we're back. We're back. Let's get moving again. Oh, we're back. So this was a slide we showed last time when I was getting you to think about, well, what kind of a profile do I want to have in the community of inquiry? Do I want to be, hello, hello? Do I want to be a question asker, information provider, solver of problems? And what would this look like within this framework, right? So remember, I was trying to get you to think about how that could potentially look. Now, do we move forward? Which one am I? Oh, yeah, I'm moving on that one. Now, if we think how this connects to your course, like, so this actual unit, has anyone noticed the CRA for community participation for task 1 and gone looking through it and gone, oh, how would I prove any of that? So what do you have to do for a 7? You have to reply to blah, blah, blah and do stuff and contributes to the personal learning network and demonstrate sharing evidence of independent and, you know, it's small, I can't really read it. But there's a whole heap of stuff you have to have done, right? How can you show evidence of that? Have you thought about it? And you should be furthering the discussion that way, right? You should actually be critically analysing those articles, not just posting them, yeah? And you'd want to be doing a whole heap of, like, commenting on other people's posts. There's a whole thing around that. There's so extent of contributions, so there's numbers of posts you're making, presumably. There's also leadership, so how are you leading the community? So, you know, what kind of a role am I playing in terms of pushing the community forward? And then there's, like, analysis and critical discussion, okay? So these are the categories you guys are meant to be hitting here. And potentially, the community of inquiry framework is one lens through which you could be analysing that and arguing that you are actually showing some sort of a contribution. So let's go to the next one. So, for example, if we go to the toolkit, oh, can I dump out of this? Oh, are we on your computer now instead of this computer? Oh my God, how did you do that? Oh, it's very exciting. Oh, I'll log in as you, that's fine.
Okay.
So, if you think about, and go to your social network analysis one, Kate. For 2016, this one down here, yeah. It'll take a while to load because we don't have very much compute power. So if you guys have logged on, you can log on to a dashboard that's a little bit different from the one that Kate has here because she's got an instructor-facing dashboard. This time series is essentially everyone in the class what they're doing, right? Well, not everyone, everyone who's signed up to the toolkit. So over time, what we see here is a whole heap of comments starting to show up as the yellow line, or the, what is it, orange? There's posts. Notice that there's sort of a periodic frequency to the posts. I wonder what's going on there. Notice that there's more commenting going on over time, somewhat. Why do you reckon that is? Plus, I think you might have all actually gotten around to reading the CRA by now, and you're starting to work out that you might be graded on that kind of stuff as well, is it? Or, you know, so students take a while sometimes to work that stuff out. What happened last night? So what's going on there? Anyone want to tell me what that data is suggesting? So Zach, for example, did not know about your assignment deadline last night. He got super excited and was just telling me, there's this amazing peak in the thing. And I'm like, so he thought it was an error with the tool, but actually it's a sign that something was going on in the class, right?
But the interesting thing about that was they weren't getting graded on comments last night. It was just an opportunity to revise their posts.
Yeah. So this was an opportunity to revise things off, finish your posts. Was the deadline for comments at all?
No, it wasn't.
Oh, interesting. Maybe you guys haven't read your CRA properly. So there's stuff going on, right? So that's the activity. That's an activity dashboard. But if we go down here, so Kate's dashboard, because of a bit of an error, can we zoom in on the one that's actually the red one? Woo! Not too much, just enough so we can see the structure. Okay, so if we go looking in here, we see your whole social network of what's going on, of the people who are mentioning people and people who are like tweeting or commenting on other people's posts. So this is covering Twitter and WordPress. Now, the white dots are essentially people who are being mentioned but who haven't signed up to the toolkit. So essentially they get tracked because they were mentioned in a tweet or something, but they're not being tracked. So anything that this person does won't get sucked in. Who do you think that is? Yeah. Okay, so that's someone who's highly embedded in the network. But there's a few other people in here who are actually quite embedded and participating very well from that social network analysis perspective, right? Well, if you sign up, there'll be more data. Yeah. So essentially, the data will come in if you sign up, and then that will add to the network.
People are more likely to sign up if they, feel confident that they're going to be the ones putting it out there.
But in the end, you get marked on the stuff that you're getting marked on anyway. So this is just a tool to help you work out how you're looking in respect to the rest of the class. So for example, there are some people here who are quite well embedded. Look at this person here. They're getting mentioned a lot, but they haven't signed up. So, there's a lot of different behaviour patterns you'll see in this stuff. There's a weird little blue dot somewhere that didn't get mentioned at all, and that's Zach doing tests. So the guy who's not connected at all is Zach, so he's all right. You don't have to worry about him. If we go to the next content analysis dashboard, can we go to the, and then hit content analysis? Over here, there'll be another dashboard in a minute with a bit of luck. So here's the same activity thing. Can we scroll down a bit, Kate? Yep, excellent. That's it. Oh, it's gone funny because the resize into thingy. This is an algorithm that's been run over the text to classify it for sentiment. And what it's finding is overall, funny colour scheme. We'll fix that at some point, Zach, won't we? Overall, very positive sentiment in the community. A little bit of negative, a little bit of neutral, which is kind of what you'd expect in a learning environment. People are encouraging each other. So that's good. That means you're not in a toxic, horrible environment with a bit of luck, if the classifier is correct. Would that be your reading of what's been going on? Fairly positive? Yeah. So this is potentially, you can be critical, and it can actually show up as a negative sentiment in some of these things. So it's maybe so is this a sign of maybe the community is not functioning as you think it should? This would be something you could write about potentially, yeah? Like, it should a really functioning educational learning community be very positive, or should there be room to be a bit critical?
Could you be critical and it still come across as positive?
You could, and this is the problem with this particular. So sentiment analyzers are problematic. Like, sentiment is a very hard thing to use machine learning on. Yeah. I agree. So I think for a really healthy one, you'd want people to feel safe enough to, criticise a little bit, but you want them to criticise in an effective, nice way.
Critical's a hard word. I think it's more questioning rather than criticising what other people are saying. You're, questioning.
Yeah.
But have you thought of it this way, or have you considered this other thing?
So there's a particular academic bent to critical that we're using here, which is like, so you can be critical in the sense of analytical without it being a critical, like you are bad kind of, yeah. But I agree, so even the semantics of critical is problematic, right? So the other thing is here we have a cognitive presence report. So this is for the whole class, yeah?
Can I just define, so what do you, how have you defined negative then?
So this is to do with the classifier is essentially normally looking for particular words that are classified as negative. So for example, annoyed, dumb, I don't know. So there's a lexicon that's essentially specified as these words are negative, and that'll feed into the classifier. These ones are actually reasonably sophisticated, so it's more than just words. Yeah, so they'll actually look at the words in combination, so it can deal with not bad and think of that as good. So things like that it can generally deal with. But that kind of stuff was holding up sentiment analysis for a very long time. But this kind of stuff gets run over most of your tweets and stuff looking for, marketing opportunities and stuff. So if people are tweeting about Coke and, talking about how it's horrible and full of sugar, that shows up in these things. Here's a cognitive presence classification, which is showing there's a lot of triggering. What we'd expect, right? This is kind of what the community is doing and what you probably should be doing. Very nice thing, though, is there's a fair bit of integration and there's a little bit of exploration and then there's a whole heap, fair bit of resolution. There's more resolution than integration and exploration, which suggests to me, it's actually backing up what you guys are saying about there's not much critical kind of interplay. So what you'll see is probably a lot of posts where someone goes, does anyone know how to do blah? And then someone goes, you do it this way. So you've jumped rather than actually explored an issue. So this is something for you to think about. Can we go back to the slides? Because we need to get out of here and give you time for your class. Next slide. Okay, so this brings us back to what we were talking about with this concept of active learning squared, because there's a problem with these classifiers, right? So this classifier for cognitive presence, it's not going to be very good. It's not very accurate because it's not trained on a data set that was built by a cohort like you guys. Essentially, it's trained on a data set that was collected in Canada doing computer science in a Moodle environment. They weren't using WordPress. They weren't blogging and tweeting, and they weren't doing what you guys are doing. So when you train your classifier on a data set that's very different, it takes a really significant accuracy dive. And so one of the things we're trying to do is work out how to resolve that issue, because if you're trying to use classifiers in education, you need to know they're accurate, because otherwise you'll start, claiming that students are something they're not, which is kind of highly problematic, right? So really what you'd like to be able to do is to give students a way to actually knock back or kick back against the classifier and to claim that it's not actually correct. You've misclassified me in some way, right? And so this is a paradigm we've invented here, which is very new. And we're trying to collect data for it. So we're inviting you all to participate in our trial so that we can get better data, which we can use later with another cohort. So with another class that Kate teaches, we'll be able to classify those students better. So we'll be able to understand the dynamics of this class more accurately. But the cool thing is, you'll get an opportunity to think about how the class is participating in the community of inquiry. So next slide. The basic idea, if you go to your student dashboard, so if you've logged onto the toolkit, there'll be a link that you can follow which says, classify your... So view your community of inquiry classifications, and it'll take you to posts by anyone in the community, and what you need to do is you need to think what you would classify that post as from triggering, exploration, integration, resolution, or other. So it's a chance to actually correct the machine and correct the classifier with a human evaluation of what's actually going on in that data. And what that means is we can actually then have a data set that is much more likely to be correct in terms of how this is working. But the nice thing is it teaches you about how you're participating in the community while you're doing it. So
And it's an excellent procrastination tool.
It is. Oh, where's it gone? Oh, there it is. So what it looks like when you actually go into the task is you see a post and you see where the post appeared in the context. So you get to see how it looked in the WordPress forum when it appeared. And you see what it was classified as. So this one was classified as triggering. And what's happening here is someone is actually about to reclassify it as something else. I think this one was, I can't read the text, it's too fuzzy. I think this one was actually exploration, wasn't it? Something like that. So essentially what's happened is the human has highlighted a bit of a feature saying, oh no, I think this is actually something else, and I think this is the text that suggests to me that it's exploration. And then they hit exploration and they go on to the next one. So you can go through as many as you like, classifying, and when you get bored, dive out. You don't have to give it a reason, but we love it if you do, because that's extra data that we can use to think about whether or not these classifiers are working correctly. So what this gives us is a chance to actually get much more sophisticated machine learning, but what it also gives you is a chance to think much more critically about how you're engaging in the community as a set of students, and to potentially intervene in your behaviour and think about how you could actually head more towards what you want to do. So if you sign up to the toolkit, you'll see that option and you can go and play with it. But we've spent a lot of time and there's only one person who's signed up, so we won't do that now. But yeah, I invite you and thoroughly would love to have you going off and doing it. So we ran this test with a learning analytics community at a summer school just at the end of the year last year. And it turns out educators are better at classifying cognitive presence than our classifier. Yay! Which is really what we were hoping would be the case. So the principle is sound, and what we're trying to do now is find out if it works well with students as well. So we'd really like to just test if that's actually correct or not. Whether you can actually do it, which we think you can. Any questions? Or in terms of... Yep. So essentially, so we can see that you've done that. None of the other students see what you've done. So essentially, it's just you leaving data in our database, which we then use. And so then all we do is we link back about what kind of accuracy different people in the class had. And you don't report that. So essentially, the ethics, if you sign onto the toolkit, the ethics form actually has quite strict restrictions in terms of what kind of data we can actually talk about beyond the context of the research team. Yeah.
Yeah, but the assumption is that whoever's doing it knows what they're talking about.
Yeah, but actually, this is the question that we'd like to test, because actually my working assumption is that I'm pretty sure humans are way better at this than machines right now. But the thing is, we can help the machines to get a little bit better at it, and if we still have the human in that loop and able to intervene. So you know when Amazon tells you, hey, you really want to buy that book, and you're like, no, I don't. You don't get to turn that off, do you? It just keeps telling you, oh yeah, you definitely want to see that book, right? And eventually it realises that you keep ignoring that recommendation and it kind of gets rid of it. But you can't, it's actually quite hard with a lot of these recommendation systems to say, just leave me alone. Yeah. So you can now, but when it first happened. But yeah, so this concept of, you know how you have these pages with what's this helpful for you? That's essentially an attempt to get that human back into the loop, because people are starting to recognise that these things are really quite poor. But that's for a very restricted subset of problem, right? Where you know this person is looking for question, finds answer, doesn't find answer, right? This kind of stuff is much harder to do, much fuzzier in terms of what's going on. And so the best practice classifiers, they're up at about, 70% accuracy for this construct, which is pretty good. It's amazing you can get that accurate, right? But it's not going to be something you can use in an educational setting, so this is highly problematic.
And let me just talk about the big picture of why this kind of thing is important too. So people like me design these kind of learning activities that get you interacting with each other, and then I get really good teaching evaluations that tell me that you guys like it. But what we don't know is the impact it's having on your learning. And so these kinds of analytic projects, or this kind of analysis where it looks at this triggering, exploration, integration, you know, there's an argument that, say, triggering might not be as good as exploration or integration, that's, you know, we're trying to get to deeper levels of cognitive presence. And we're never going to be able to measure that stuff properly until we can train classifiers and get these algorithms working well. And so in the longer term, it benefits future learners if we can build these kinds of data sets. Because, you know, last semester I had this discussion with Kirsty about whether or not anyone was doing anything other than triggering, and I'm saying, well, yes, they are. They are doing triggering, but they are doing more than triggering. And Kirsty's saying, but no, these Twitter chats, they're all triggering. And I'm like, but that's why I designed this intervention where we reflect on them in blog posts. But in order to make that stuff come through, we have to kind of do this training. And the side product for you guys is you're getting assessed on, I was about to say obsessed, but that's probably me, not you, assessed on how you are contributing to the community, and this tool can help you to think about that. But there is a bigger picture reason why it's important, which is why, you know, partly why these guys are here, and I give them time.
Anyway, so thank you for having us, and I will go off now, and we'll leave you to the rest of your course. So good luck, and hopefully you will get excellent grades for your community participation.
Thanks.
I'm off.
Cool. Thank you. Okay, guys, online, we might just take 2 minutes while I switch over slide decks and see if I can get this computer in the classroom working properly. Okay. Can you guys hear me online? Cool. I'm still running off my machine because this computer here doesn't want to load anything. I don't know. It's got Mondayitis, I think. I've got Mondayitis too. Okay, we're going to get underway again, and we're going to start out by talking about assignment 2 and 3. So I lost my voice for almost a week and a half, and I just got it back on the weekend, and I sat down to make a video about the assignment, and I thought, what am I going to talk about in this video? Because that's not actually already on the page. So I thought we would start by asking if there are any questions about the assignment 2, expression of interest, before I try and regurgitate what's on the page. Does everyone know what they're doing? You don't know what you're doing? Have you looked at it at all? Have you looked at it though? Okay. Have you looked at it, Sheree? Okay, all right. Has anyone had a good look at it and yeah, do you know what you're doing? Okay. Yeah. Yeah, basing it on a real library is a good idea. Yep. Yeah, so basing it on a real library allows you to not have to make up contextual factors, which makes the whole process a lot easier. Okay, so I'm going to run through it then. So the idea is that you are going to apply for a grant for a program, product or service. Now, in order to apply for that grant, you've basically got to design a program, product or service. What I'm going to talk about tonight is some methodologies for design. I've also talked about, there's a video that I've made about designing digital literacy programs, which, so it's about coming up with learning outcomes, and you can apply that kind of methodology to lots of different types of programs. But I'm going to talk about some other methodologies for designing things tonight too. We've also talked about design thinking. So what you need to do is we've designed the template in a way that allows you to work through the design process and design your program by completing the grant application template. Having said that, the grant application template is actually based on a real life example, so it's a true to life kind of example of what you might be expected to do when applying for a grant to fund a new program, product or service. In lots of organisations, when there are external grants up for grabs, the process of application is run in a two-tier way. So often what will happen is within an organisation, say for example QUT Library, there might be 5 different groups of staff with 5 different program ideas, and the library is going to apply for this external grant offered by ALIA, for example. And so the organisation will often want to choose just a couple of ideas to focus on developing rather than to put up 5 different ideas. So what often happens is there'll be an internal expression of interest process where people say, okay, I'm interested in applying for this grant. Here's what I'm thinking about. Now we're using that kind of that idea of an internal expression of interest here as a way to give you interim feedback on your ideas. So we're asking you to complete an expression of interest that doesn't require a great deal of detail in a lot of the fields on the main application form, but it's just about giving Claire an opportunity to see what you are planning so she can give you some feedback on whether the idea is a sound idea. So that's assignment 2. You'll complete the expression of interest form. Assignment 3 is about then building on what you did in assignment 2 and going through and filling out the rest of the application form. And there's a prescribed format for doing that, which there almost always is for grant applications. And in most cases, just like in this example, the form will have a restriction on the number of characters or words that you can put into the form, and it will just cut you off when you reach character 5,000 with no thought for whether you're in the middle of a word or not. So learning to work with those kinds of things is important, and that's why we do that here. So essentially for the expression of interest, we're asking you to develop the front end of the application, which is the project description. So a title, you'll be identifying your organisation, roughly how much money you think you'll be asking for, the purpose, aims and objectives, as well as anticipated benefits of the program, and an overview of the program. So it's actually 1,050 words maximum. So that's all you're being asked to do for the beginning. It's not meant to be a lot of detail. Obviously, 500 words to define the purpose, aims, objectives and anticipated benefits. You're going to be writing a very brief, succinct summary. I can't see the chat at all, but you'll wave me, won't you? Okay, cool. So then, once you get into assignment 3, you'll be developing the rest of the application, including like a project plan, assessment criteria for the project, and that kind of thing. So the idea is you're going to develop a product, program or service, or you're going to design one, and then you're going to propose it through you're going to apply for this grant, which is essentially a lot like a proposal, but you're making it's a persuasive document. You're trying to argue for funding for your project. So it's a bit different from like a report where you're reporting back on something. It's about actually being persuasive. And I've got a handout for you that isn't really a handout. I'll put it on the site after class that gives you a bit of a summary of the differences between a report and a proposal, so you can see what kind of language you should be using in this type of document. Does that kind of make it clearer what the idea of the task is? Okay, all right. I thought that's what it said on the site, but if anybody wants to give me any feedback about how we can make the description on the site more user-friendly, that would be useful. I thought there was a printable version. Let me have a look. I put a printer-friendly style sheet in there. Yeah, there is a printer-friendly style sheet. It's not... yeah, so... That's okay, because one thing that you can do, if that ever happens to you, if you want to print something from the web and it's cutting off, if you go to print, and then instead of sending it to the printer, change the location to save as PDF, it will save a PDF version, and it will usually have it in a version that's printable. So, But if you save it as a PDF before you print it, so instead of sending it to your printer, if you change the location to save as PDF, you might find, I think you'll find it'll be okay. But I can send you a PDF version anyway. And the reason that there isn't just a click here and it'll take you to a printer-friendly version is that you lose all of this down the bottom if we do that, which is, I think, the biggest benefit of the site is that the comments are threaded on the pages. But anyway. Okay. Okay, all right. Okay, so anything else we can do to make the requirements clearer? Let us know. I will make a video, seeing that seems to have helped, I will go and make a video overview of me talking it through, but it's not going to really add anything, it'll probably be more of a repeat of what's on the site.
So the only thing I think, just watching comms over the last couple of days, particularly for people that worry that they haven't formed a group yet,
Yeah.
so they've got any tips as far as
Yes.
what to do if you're not in a group?
So yeah, some people have been asking about what do they do if they're not in a group already. So I put up a post a few days ago about how you can go about finding a group, and one of the things I suggested was putting a blog post up on your own blog, asking, well, basically advertising for a partner, saying what you are after in an assignment partner, what you're looking for in terms of what mark are you looking for, what type of library context would you like to work in, those kinds of things, so that you can start a conversation with someone about sorry, I just saw an error come up in the Twitter feed and I shouldn't look at that. So those kinds of things about what you might be looking for in an assignment partner, so you can find someone to work with. Helen, you just said, when was that? So it was, it might have even been 2 weeks ago now. The sign-up form is linked from the assignment page, at the template at the top of the page. Yeah. No. So it's on the top of the assignment page. Sign up your group. Yeah. So I think, can I just get a show of hands in the classroom? How many of you don't have partners yet? 1, 2. Okay. And how about online? How are we going for partners? Okay, so people are tweeting using the unit hashtag to see who wants partners. People are putting posts up on their blogs. So you just need to monitor each other's blogs, monitor the feed on the homepage, and be proactive about contacting people who've posted and asked to say that they're looking for an assignment partner. I would also recommend, if you put a post up asking looking for an assignment partner, that you tweet about it as well, so that people who are watching the hashtag feed can help you with that. If you haven't got a partner by, say Friday, then we'll put in some intervention measures to match you up with people. But it's much better if you can come up with your own assignment partner than us trying to find you assigning you an assignment partner. That's not usually a particularly productive way to start a partnership.
May I just ask a question, and can I just say something?
Yes?
Sorry. So Neil just asked a question about defining the audience. Can you just say adults? Look, you can, but one thing I will advise you based on the group from last year, be very aware of scope creep in the project, program, product or service that you are suggesting. A smaller program is a better concept to frame around. So, you know, a small toddler time reading group as opposed to a reading project for all schools in the council area. So try and keep it focused, try and keep it, don't let it be the great program to solve the world's problems.
Yeah, so go back to the design thinking week where we talked about designing for one user is better than designing for a scattergun approach, and keep it focused. Next week's class, next week there's a Twitter chat, and then following the Twitter chat we're having a 1 hour online only class. So you'll see, oh, it's not showing up. Oh no, there it is. Okay, so there's going to be from 7:15 on Monday night a 1 hour online only class, and it's going to be an assignment clinic. But the way I ran this last year was I got everyone to come along prepared to talk for 1 minute about what they were planning to do with their program, product or service, and then get some feedback on what they were thinking about doing. So prepare for that as well. But I want to move on to the lecture material from tonight because it will help you with understanding what we're doing with the assignment. And I will do I'll do a quick video overview of the assignment for you. We'll have that class next week. And just remember that you're only writing 1,000 words at this stage, so you don't need to think through all the logistics. All you've got to do is come up with a description of what you want to do and work out what the objectives and aims are. Okay, we good to move on, do you think? Okay. Let's see if it's going to let me share my files now. What is wrong with this computer? Yeah, it's still not displaying here. It's stuck on the old one. Are you able to answer that question? Thanks. Okay, yeah, it's completely stuck. Okay, guys, I'm just going to have to revert to screen sharing again. Okay, so what I wanted to talk to you about tonight is developing a new program, product or service. So what we're going to do is talk about some theories that you can use to underpin planning new programs, products or services, and talk about processes associated with doing that as well. So 2 things I wanted to mention before we get started. I'm just going to turn the lights down in here because that's not going to be easy to read. Is that better? There's not a lot of pink backgrounds. Okay, so the first thing I wanted to say is that there's 2 things I want to start with. The first thing is planning is actually really important, and surprisingly, it doesn't always happen. So in the past, I've had a librarian who worked in a couple of different public libraries come and talk about the value of strategic linking for program, product and service delivery, and for planning programs, products and services as well. And it's surprising how often people don't do this stuff. When you work in organisations, it's obviously very important to do the planning so that you run a great service, but it's also important that you've done all of this stuff so that when something goes wrong, you've got all of this stuff behind you as well. So planning is important from lots of different perspectives. The other thing I want to talk about is, I've said a few times in this unit that there's not a lot of theory in this space. Well, there is a whole lot of theory behind product and service design. In fact, service design is a discipline of its very own, and we definitely can't cover it in one lecture. As I mentioned, there isn't the theory that's specific to our context, but what we can do is draw from those other disciplines. And what I'm going to do tonight is bring in a few different threads from different places to help you think about planning. So we can pull from the business perspective with service and product design. Design is of itself its own discipline, and we can also draw from project management when we're designing these things as well. So when we think about what we might do in terms of coming up with a model for designing I'm going to call them SPPs, so I don't have to keep saying services, products and programs. One of the disciplines that we can draw from that's very useful is user-centred design. User-centred design approaches are both philosophies and processes in which the needs, wants and limitations of end users play a central role at each stage of the design process. So we've talked about how design theory can be really useful in the context of designing SPP, so I won't harp on that for too long. But so I've mentioned user-centred design there, and yes, it's really useful in terms of online services in particular, because user-centred design we often think about in terms of online design, so user experience design and usability and so forth. Then there's other disciplines like human-centred product or service design, and this is about focusing on serving human needs and goals, and with all artefacts having a purpose, and good design helps humans accomplish something they couldn't otherwise do in such an effective or efficient way. So this is another valid and useful framework, but it's also really, really complex, and implementing a full human-centred product or service design approach is often going to be overkill for you developing a new Storytime initiative. You may not want to go into the, the rigours of the methodology to come up with something that's small scale and local. But what the commonality between these different methods is the user focus, and that's a perspective that we can take from these different methods for design and bring with us into what we're doing. So the user is the key element in the design process. We need to understand our users and their needs in order to solve what their needs are. So this goes back to what Claire was saying about scope creep and keeping your scope really focused when you're designing a program, product or service, because it's much easier to design for a single person than it is to design for everybody. And because I'm screen sharing, my battery has gone flat. Thank you. So the other thing I just wanted to mention here is that for big projects, it might actually be really appropriate to apply one of these methodologies. But when we're talking about these smaller scale things that we're doing, or programs that aren't costing $1 million, then sometimes taking some of the principles from these design methodologies is really all we need to do. So are there any questions so far about that? No? Okay. So all of that is to say that there are methodologies around for designing products, programs and services. They are complex. You could go and do a whole degree in service design and then apply it in library context. I'm also of the belief that we should buy in skills, and so I think that we don't need to know all of these disciplines. I think we're librarians, and it's important to have an understanding of design and to be able to design programs and local services and that kind of thing. But when it comes to designing a multi-million-dollar service, for example, we should be doing things like bringing in consultants who are designers to help us facilitate those processes. Because first and foremost, we are librarians, and librarians are very good at also thinking that we're accountants and marketers and everything else under the sun. But we value our professional expertise and our professional knowledge, and we should value that of other professions as well. But we can learn from these disciplines and apply things in a local, smaller scale. So I want to run through a process, and this is very much the kind of process that I used in practice when I was designing these things. It's based on, you'll see in a moment, a process that's documented in one of the readings for this week, but it's something that I've also expanded for you. So did anyone have a chance to look at the Hill reading this week? Yeah, it's quite a good book, actually. It's an interesting read. So in that book, they talk about 5 phases for building library community, and I think this is quite a good model for to use when we're talking about designing programs, products and services, because what we're really trying to do through a lot of the things that we do is build community and get community engagement. So they talk about assess, deliver, engage, iterate and sustain, but I want to expand that to include a few more things. So as we kind of take this from a community engagement methodology into a development process, I think that we need to add in some stages. So we've got the assess stage, and that's where we kind of look at what people need. And I won't go into too much detail about these now because I'm going to talk you through them individually. Then we have a design phase, which is where we do the design work. We usually then have to propose it to the organisation. Once we get sign-off, we usually plan it. Then we deliver it. We need to engage people and get them involved in what it is we're doing. We usually then evaluate it, hopefully, which doesn't always happen, iterate it. And then I've added to sustain, which they have at the end of the model for engagement, retire, because when we talk about services, products and programs, they're not always successful. And sometimes they're successful for a time, but then those needs are no longer there and you do need to retire things and move on. So I'm going to walk you through this development process now. So first up in the assess phase. So we talked about looking at empathy and engaging with our users as methods for understanding what user needs are. In other units, you probably will be talking about already, or will talk about later, a user needs analysis, and we talk about that in the context of collections, for example, where you assess what your users' needs are for the collection. So what we usually do with the user needs analysis is look at what people's needs are, and then we assess where the gaps are in what we're providing. We might look at where those gaps and the needs align with our mission, vision, or strategic plan. So we don't necessarily fill those gaps unless it does align with what we're actually in the community doing, what our purpose is. We might take this from a problem-based perspective where we identify a problem in the community that we need to solve, or something that we can contribute to, and then design a service, product or program to address that problem. And then we might kind of do some brainstorming around how we could meet those needs. But beyond looking at user data, and the kinds of user data that we typically use in user needs analysis are, for example, statistics about the community. So you might get from the census data, for example. There's a service called Profile ID that a lot of the councils subscribe to that gives these snapshots of census data for local regions, and that's really useful. If you're struggling to read this, I will be putting the slides online for you as well. I was hoping to make them prettier, but didn't have time, so they're not there yet. So services like Profile ID will give you that demographic data. Our systems will capture data about what people are borrowing. When we're delivering programs, we'll capture data about who's attending, those kinds of things. But beyond that, we can use other tools drawn from other disciplines like business. For example, a SWOT analysis, where we look at strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats. And when we do that, we look at the current situation on the left-hand side with the strengths and weaknesses, and the future situation in terms of opportunities and threats. So that's one approach that we can take, a SWOT analysis. Another approach that I think is really useful is a market segment and surface offering matrix. And so what this does is look at the existing markets that we service and the new segments of the market that we might like to service. And it looks at existing programs and new programs. And it then looks at the needs that we currently meet and that we might not be meeting, and identifies opportunities for us to be meeting different needs. It's quite similar to a strengths, weaknesses and opportunities matrix, but it focuses on different segments of the market. So it can be useful in this assessment of, I guess, what are the needs of our community phase, because it does focus on people. As the term market segment might apply, it comes from a business discipline, so it is market focused. But for our purposes, cross out the word market and think of user group or community even. Much better than user group too. So those are a couple of ways that we can assess what the community needs are. And I did just want to reiterate for those of you who didn't catch it when I mentioned it before, the statistics tool that I was talking about that lots of local councils have or provide access to is called Profile ID, as in the letter I, the letter D. There's nothing in Profile ID profiles for council areas that you couldn't get by looking at the census data. The beauty of it is it's packaged up really neatly, and the files, the graphs and things it provides, they're actually all licensed so that you can just copy them and paste them into your work. So you can't copy and paste into a grant application form, but for other assignments in other units it might be useful. Good feedback, Chloe, thanks. So just keep that tool in mind. It's a really good, useful tool for demographic data, but don't forget you've got to do the interpretation on it as well. So the demographic data doesn't tell you what the need is, it just tells you something about the community, and you need to think about what that might mean. Okay, so in the design phase, you might have done your brainstorming and coming up with an idea for a program, but you need to define and refine it. And that process can work often works very organically. So we went through an iterative design process in was that the last class? No. Maybe it was the last class. Feels like a lot longer ago. So in that iterative activity, we went through a process of coming up with an idea, getting feedback on it, iterating it, and then working through the design process. So this is about mapping it out, making sure you understand what it looks like. In the context of doing your assignment, you obviously don't have access to customers to get real user feedback or to do kind of prototyping, but you can talk to each other online about what you're proposing. You can put posts up on your blogs and see what you think about each other's ideas, test out those ideas, get feedback on them, iterate them, and move forward. So also treat assignment 2 as part of that iteration process. So you're giving us almost like a prototype of your service description, really, and we'll give you, or Claire will give you feedback on that you can then iterate. But the important thing to keep in mind about the design process is that design is not linear. You don't design once and it's right. Often you have to go through these phases of iteration. And one thing you'll learn in libraries is that we really like to iterate like crazy because we like things to be perfect before they go out to the public. So that iteration becomes often a lot about dotting I's and crossing T's. So often in this design phase is when we will select technologies that apply to solutions. And I like to talk about technologies here a little bit. We're actually not going to talk about evaluating it later because it's not actually a part of this assignment anymore. But lots of students will come up with projects that are based around technologies, and I just wanted to note that sometimes in an organisation, if you are designing something that involves a technology, you may not actually be involved in the selection of the technology. So you might identify a need for a technology, and then there's a whole tendering process, and that gets looked after by a different department. So sometimes if it's a small-scale project and you're in an organisation that has lots of control over their IT, you might do the selection, but you also may not do the selection. So that's just something to keep in mind. And sometimes you'll have to design the whole thing, not knowing exactly what that technology solution is going to be. Once you kind of know what you're doing, you then need to propose your idea for a program and what you want to do to the organisation. So this is a process of gaining sign-off for what it is you want to do. This involves developing a proposal for a specific audience. Sorry, just trying to avoid coughing into the microphone. Usually that's management, sometimes it's a funding body, sometimes it might be both. So you might write a proposal for management for a program, product or service, and also kind of be concurrently writing a grant application, and those two things can feed and fuel each other. But the key output at this stage of the design process is a proposal. Once you get sign-off, you have to then go into planning the program, product or service, or planning for the implementation. Sometimes this will be executed as a project. So there'll be a project to initiate the service, product or program, and then it will go into an operational phase. Sometimes you'll just go straight into an operational phase. In my experience, particularly around tech-related projects, you often do piloting before you kind of go into operational. Piloting is often where you'll actually launch the program as a pilot for the whole audience to engage with. And then at the end of the pilot process, you'll do an assessment of that pilot and make a decision about whether it stays or goes. So some of the risks around that include establishing community expectation that it's going to be there. That also can be an advantage in organisations that are particularly risk averse. If you can get a pilot up and get community engagement, sometimes they are hesitant to not wind the pilot down if it's going well, because you've got community engagement and there's risk associated with pulling something that seems to be working. So it can be a sneaky strategy for getting things done, which I don't advocate for at all. Never did it myself, never. Yeah, yeah.
And some things either stay in beta forever until they decide they're not going to do it anymore, or they just become tools that get used, like Gmail.
Yeah.
Gmail went out in beta.
Google search itself was beta for a long time, like until a few years ago. Yeah. So I think that also being transparent with customers and talking about things as being pilots and not necessarily raising expectations that it's going to be an ongoing service can be useful as well. So in this planning phase, your key output is a project plan. So you've done a proposal. This is something different again. A proposal is a persuasive, argumentative document. A plan is about laying down in steps what you're actually going to do to get this thing off the ground. It guides with implementation, it outlines how you're going to evaluate, and it helps you to keep the whole process on track. And it tends to be a lot more detailed than a proposal. In terms of having the kind of timeline stuff, but also just in terms of often proposals you're writing for a management audience, so they're quite brief because of who you're writing for. You need to be brief and succinct. So some other things that you might output at this planning stage include, if it's a big project, you might have things like a Gantt chart for implementation. Sometimes that's overkill. You might have a detailed budget, or if it's just a small project, there might just be a small budget section in your plan. You might have a separate risk management plan. In many libraries, regardless of the size, you would have a separate risk management plan anyway, because we tend to be quite cautious about the fact that we're engaging with the public and, you know, what if someone trips over or electrocutes themselves, but of course there are a whole bunch of other risks as well related to kind of management of the service and management of the implementation, like what happens if the technology fails and we can't get where we're meant to get. Another item might be a communication plan. So when you come to do your project brief for your project unit, you'll be writing something like this kind of project plan, and you'll be incorporating all of these items into your project plan. And in practice, that's often what happens. You'll have one project plan with all of this stuff contained within it, because there isn't really a need for, unless you're implementing a new library management system, to come up with a really detailed budget. Sometimes a table will just do it. So some things that we think about with implementation are that we often don't implement a formal project management methodology in libraries when we're implementing small-scale programs, or, for example, if you want to roll out a new youth service, like say a new program for teens, you won't go and implement Prince2 project management methodologies across that project, because it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense because it's overkill. And it's overkill because of the cost, the risk and the scope of the project. It's just not necessary in terms of the investment, in terms of cost, or the risks that might be at play, or just the size of the program to be doing that kind of project methodology. So essentially, we evaluate whether the extent of those warrants a full project management implementation. One thing I'll just talk about here briefly is terminology. And libraries are often part of bigger organisations. So, for example, local public libraries are part of a council. Councils have whole project management methodologies that exist, including lots of templates for project planning. And as soon as you say the word project, you are immediately funneled into the project management system, and you have to hire a project manager, and it costs X amount of dollars, and it gets expensive, and it all just escalates out of the ballpark. So often some libraries will talk about things not necessarily as projects, but they might call it an initiative or a program, or they'll use different terminology to kind of avoid getting into these bigger organisational structures around things like project management. So that can be fairly deliberate in some libraries, and is not necessarily a bad thing. I've certainly seen projects, I don't know if I've mentioned it to you guys before, but one project I worked on for an implementation of like a $500 piece of software come back at multiple tens of thousands of dollars because it was deemed a project and taken to the organisational level. And in that case, there probably wasn't any other way to get it implemented. But as soon as you start using words like project in some organisational structures, you do get forced into those things. Are we still all good online? Cool. So it's being sensitive to the environment and the politics and how these things work in the environment so that you know the best way to get around these things. But yeah, in general, you might apply project management principles to how you run your project, and in fact you should, but you wouldn't necessarily fully apply a project management methodology. Okay, so once you've got sign-off, which is the outcome from the proposal phase, and I will just iterate here too that, the sign-off happens at the proposal phase, but it also often happens at the planning phase as well. So whenever I wrote a project plan in practice, one of the recommendations would be that that management signed off on the project plan so that we could implement it, and then I would have a sign-off section in the document where these things can get signed off. And that's good to have at the proposal phase as well. They're certainly good at the planning phase. So once you've got that sign-off and you're ready to roll, you've done your planning, the next thing you need to do is deliver it. And this is a bit where I can't really tell you what to do because it's going to depend on whatever you are doing, but you go off and you deliver this new thing that you've come up with. In order to do that delivery and throughout the delivery process, you need to engage with the community and get them engaged in the program. So you need to secure customer participation and engagement, and marketing is really important for doing this and getting real buy-in to what it is you're doing. So I'm not going to ask you, that is essentially a rhetorical question, but what are the risks of not doing this? Well, your new shiny thing fails. So these are things that you need to plan for in that planning phase, thinking about how you're actually going to get engagement. Yeah?
In a library situation, is it you that does the marketing?
That's a good question.
Is it the librarian that does the marketing? Because it is really time-consuming.
Yeah, so in a library, that question just for the recording was, in a library organisation, is it the librarian that does the marketing? This is another one of those issues where sometimes you just don't want to talk to corporate communications because you get caught up in a million different things. So is it the librarian that does the marketing? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. It depends on the size and scope. So in my last job, I worked at Gold Coast City Council Libraries, and we centrally, library administration, did the marketing for programs, products and services across the library service, so it didn't happen in the branches. So I, as the online futures librarian, did do marketing stuff, working with the marketing department. So there are some things that you work with marketing on, like the formal publications, and then there are some things that you don't work with marketing on, like, for example, the marketing that might happen in the branch through things like informal posters and that kind of thing. So the risks around in any organisation, and pretty much in every job that I've had, when you don't do the marketing yourself, it costs exponentially more because there are always internal consultancy fees basically for engaging a marketer from marketing. You have to pay them to do your collateral for you, and often we don't have the budget for that, and this is the problem, that we absorb a lot of that work. I mean, I even do it in my job now. We just went to a conference and I made every single poster for the booth because if I send it to marketing, it's going to cost me thousands of dollars. But you know what? I've got enough desktop publishing skills that I can do that myself and print it for $60 at Officeworks, much simpler. So that is part of the problem. So we think we can do it all, and some people can do it all, but you know what? My posters probably, they're not as slick as they would be if they came, well, they're definitely not as slick as they would be if they came through corporate comms. Oh, thank you. They would be punctuated better. Sorry?
They're absolutely focused on what you want to portray.
Exactly.
Marketing may get the wrong slant.
Yeah.
And all that money is actually don't get a return on the dollar.
That's very true. So marketing sometimes get the wrong slant. They do. And so I am always very careful. I'm fairly sure that in every job I've ever had, marketing have hated working with me because I generally can punctuate better than the person doing the desktop publishing. So at the very least, it's coming back with grammar corrections. And at the very worst, you know, the design briefs I've given in the past have been like, picture here, this big, I want this image from this stock site, and this, you know, and I'm sure I drive them crazy. But yeah, we do absorb a lot of that work. We do get the messages out that we want to get. Are they as slick as they might be? If they came through marketing, maybe not. But that's why we do a lot of it. It's cost creep, but also marketing departments in a lot of big organisations, particularly government organisations, still haven't worked out that you can't send them a tweet 2 weeks in advance to get it approved in order to tweet it. Like, you need to be able to opportunistically pick up on something in the news and go, oh, look, we've got a program coming up on this next week. Like, you can't schedule that stuff. You've got to be opportunistic. And they haven't worked that out yet. So in some libraries, they've got control of the library social media. So they'll use their social media rather than going to the bigger organisations' social media accounts, even though they might have more reach, because it's too complicated to go through corporate communications. It's easier to keep it in the library. Yeah, can be. That was a long answer, but that's why we do it. Yeah. Yeah, it depends. And like Claire said, you know, like an organisation like State Library is the library with its own marketing department. Like, they're not dealing with some central government marketing department, and you know, they work for the library exclusively, so they would hopefully understand what that library's needs are and who their customers are and who they're reaching and that kind of thing. Gets more complicated when you're dealing with bigger organisations. Okay. So evaluation. Evaluation is something else that needs to be planned for, so you shouldn't necessarily be planning at the end of the delivery cycle for how you're going to evaluate. Think about this in advance. So I'm talking here about the project and whether it's met its objectives. I mentioned before that often an implementation of a new program, product or service will be delivered through a project. So if you're delivering a new program and it's part of a project, there's usually objectives for that project. Those objectives include, you know, the successful delivery of this new service. So you won't just evaluate the service, you'll also evaluate the project that delivered the service. So did the project do what it was meant to do? Has it had impact? And then we look at things like how has the service product program performed in terms of key performance indicators. So you have to be able to think in advance about what these kinds of indicators might be. And the way we evaluate depends on a lot of things. It depends on the nature of the program, product and service, kind of first and foremost. It also depends on things like what influences management in your organisation. So in some organisations, they might be more driven by powerful customer testimonies and stories, so personal narratives of how the program, product or service had impact. In other organisations, they might be more interested in quantitative you know, measures of how many people through the door and how did that translate into loans, or what impact did it have on X, Y or Z. So often you'll want to do a bit of a mix of the qualitative and quantitative stuff together, so a combination of the numbers along with some of those, like the quotes from users about what they found valuable as part of that evaluation. So things that tend to be very difficult to evaluate are services that are based online in social media, for example. We still haven't quite worked out how to benchmark this stuff. So this is better now than it used to be. I remember the first time I implemented a blog service, there was no benchmarking data, and there was very little discussion anywhere in the business literature, anywhere, about what it meant to be successful with a blog. Because blogs aren't just about how many people get across the site, but they're also about things like how long do people stay on the site for when they come to visit the site? Do they click the links in the articles, which could be important for a library. If it's a book review, ultimately you want to see them click the link to the catalogue to borrow or reserve the book or borrow the ebook. You want to know things like, are they commenting and engaging in discussion on the site? So, and it depends on, of course, what your aims are for the service. So if your aim for your book review service is just to get lots and lots of traffic, that's great. But if you're interested in generating community engagement as part of this service, then you do want to know whether they're commenting, whether they're clicking links, how long they're staying on the site, whether they're reading one article or whether they're reading 12 articles while they're there. Are they subscribing? Are they clicking links through from when they get an email alert? All those kinds of things. So it varies very much depending on the nature of the service. Some things that you might measure, like with Storytime, for example, are repeat turn-up, so more people coming, not just coming once, but coming for multiple weeks. Other things that you can measure around those programs, for example, is when you have a Storytime in a public library, you prepare for an onslaught of book returns immediately before, and then a huge amount of borrowing at the end of it. So those kinds of things tell you about the impact of the service as well, because it's not just about getting people in the building, but getting them engaging with the collection. So the key output at this evaluation stage is usually a report to management. It might be a project report, or it might be a report evaluating the service. So once you've done evaluation, I would hope usually iterate and refine, which doesn't always happen. But if we're doing a good, rigorous evaluation, then hopefully we would very much want to do that iteration and to improve what we're doing. So we look at what does our evaluation tell us, and do we need to make changes? And a key output at this stage, often you'll make recommendations as part of the evaluation for what might need to change. But another key output at this stage might be a new iteration of the program. So that's kind of, actually, I didn't talk about retire or sustain or retire. So the last phase is where you make that decision about whether you sustain or retire the program. And if you are sustaining, usually, or there may be some iteration, there may not be. You may have designed the perfect program. But when we retire things, that also takes work and planning, so you can't just pull the rug out from under a service. You do need to kind of think about how you gradually pull that back. So that's essentially meant to be the end of the cycle. But I want to encourage you to think about there being another step in that cycle. And that step is about documenting what you've done and contributing back to the evidence base about what you've done. So if you've done all the work to do a rigorous evaluation and assessed what you're doing, maybe you've iterated, maybe you haven't iterated, maybe you've decided to retire the service, regardless of the outcome, what you have done is going to be of interest to someone else. And so I think it's really important, if you've done all that work and you've done the evaluation, that's essentially research in practice, that you then take what you've learned from that and publish about it and contribute back to the literature base so that other people can pick that up as part of their planning or proposing for their programs, products and services, and build on that with what they're doing. Lots of libraries do this, and lots of libraries are very happy to do this, and all you need to do is ask management if it's okay, and usually they'll go, yes, that's a great idea, let's do that. because the venues that we talk about it in are usually the kind of LIS conference circuit or journals or even trade publications like ALIA's Insight magazine, and those are read by the other professionals. And even if it's not a successful service, it's still profile raising for the organisation to have what they've done be out there. So usually I've never had anyone say, no, you can't talk about that.
I know one.
Really?
Yeah, and that's some law libraries and corporate libraries.
Yeah,
won't
true.
Publish due to information and confidence reasons.
Yeah.
But they're the exception. They're the only sector that
Yeah.
you will not find a lot of literature about.
Yeah. And I want to say fair enough, but actually I think it sucks. But I also understand why they don't do it. Like, they're spending the money and, yeah. And there are projects that definitely are commercial in confidence for sure. So that, I guess, is the kind of the planning and proposal phase. Does anybody have any questions? It's like a potted...
We will have to sort of fast forward this and just, you know, identify what might happen.
No, you don't need to. So you're only all you're doing, this is about designing services, right? There is a second part to this lecture which we're not going to get through, which is about writing proposals, which relates more to what you're doing with your grant application. So I'll record this for you tomorrow and put that up. Yeah. So essentially what I'm going to go through here is a whole process of, so we're going right back to the beginning of this process into this proposing phase, and I'm going to walk you through what a proposal might look like. And then you can take what you learned there from proposals and apply that to your grant application. So your grant application is just proposing a service and arguing for the funding. Yeah. Yes.
Can I just add another thing in there? I would add another step in here, and perhaps it doesn't occur with libraries as much, but I would put a liaise step in there, because a lot of grants that you go for, you need to have letters of support from other organisations, and you need to have other organisations have agreed that they think it's a good idea and they'll put in their involvement. Yeah. So I think liaising with other organisations and being really bold to go, I've got this really good idea, do you agree with it, even before you've had it approved, is a big part of it too.
Yeah. So I would probably, like in the process of designing a program, I would put that right back at the beginning in the kind of design propose phase. And that would be, yeah, it does take really courageous conversations, which we're not always necessarily great at doing, especially when it involves asking for money or talking about how good we are. We're not very good at that either. So yes, liaison in terms of the stuff is really important, because often you might need to provide matching funds or have an organisation who's willing to partner with you. So sometimes those things will be conditions of the grants.
So I've actually been on a grant panel for Queensland Public Libraries, and that was actually one of the requirements. And the reason that was a requirement was because, for example, some of the libraries, it was a technology grant application, and some of the libraries were asking for money to put Wi-Fi in their branches. So that we're only talking 2 years ago. Many regional public libraries don't have Wi-Fi yet. So they wanted to put Wi-Fi in, but they had to provide a letter of support from their council to say that council would actually pay the internet costs. Because we could give them the Wi-Fi hotspots, but if no one was going to pay the bill, there was no point, because they would never be turned on. So yeah, the relevant support from the relevant stakeholders is important.
Yeah, so where you might bring this into your grant application is, did I end up including a stakeholder matrix in here? Yeah, so you will have a stakeholder. Did I take it out because it was too long? I did, I took it out because it was too long. It might be in the communication plan, I have to revisit it. Yeah, so often you'll have a stakeholder matrix either in the proposal or the planning phase, where you need to talk about whether you how you're going to consult with different stakeholders and what stage you're at with doing that. Actually, I think this is in my mind. I just marked project proposals today for project units, and one of the projects I marked is the Fun Palace. So if you haven't already expressed interest in volunteering, you might like to do that. And they did a fantastic job of their stakeholder matrix and their communication plan, where they talked about the direct points of communication, and then they talked about where they were up to in the various stages. So that's kind of how you might handle that in your planning process as well. Okay. Just talk amongst yourselves for 1 second. Sorry, I just had to do a quick conference with Claire, because she's marking it, not me. Because we're behind on the content here tonight, we're going to give you a week's extension on the EOI. Yeah, sorry, I have to check with her first, because it messes up her workload if I do those things without asking, which I have a tendency to do. It probably helps you too. Okay, cool. So we'll give you that week's extension, and I think that means that this will be due on the Sunday of the break rather than the end of week. Is it the break after next week? Okay, yeah, 1 more week and then there's a break. So it was due at the end of week 9. So we'll push it out to the end of the break. So Sunday of the break. So that would make it the 2nd of October. But I'll put a post up confirming that. Jinx, Stephanie, I will do that. So I'll put a post up and I'll update the schedule as well. So we will... 2 things. I'm going to run through the content that we didn't get through tonight on writing proposals in a video for you. I'll put that up tomorrow. I'll make that the first thing I do in the morning, so you've got it as soon as possible. And then next Monday's class, after the Twitter chat, come prepared to talk for a minute, even though it's online and it's very scary, I know, to turn your microphone on. I have to do it every week, so you can just do it for 60 seconds next week. Pick the most courageous person in your group to turn their microphone on for 60 seconds and give us a quick overview of what you're planning to do for your program, product or service, and we'll give you some quick feedback. So this is kind of a check measure so that we know that you've started thinking about it. And so in the post that I put up after tonight's class, I'll confirm the extension, but I'll also talk about some mechanisms for us assigning you partners if you haven't sorted that out yourself in the next few days, so by Friday. Better than Christmas. Okay, cool. Awesome. All right, we can go home feeling good about ourselves tonight, Claire. We gave them a Christmas present. Okay, so quick summary of where we're at. I will put that post up confirming the extension and the mechanisms for getting a partner. And I will do the recording about the assignment dutifully, and I will do the recording about the proposal stuff that we didn't get through tonight. And the design thinking debrief I also owe you as well, now that I have a voice. So, does anyone have any questions about anything we've talked about tonight before we finish up? No? I just sense that everyone's relieved now and would like to go home and have a glass of wine. Or is that just how I'm feeling? Okay. All right. I'm going to take the silence as nobody has any... Oh, hang on. No, there's no requirement for this to be unique. It just has to meet a need in your target demographic group, whatever. We're all about evidence-based practice, and evidence-based practitioners don't reinvent the wheel if there's already a good solution. Start with a good solution and look at how you can apply it. So yeah, nowhere does it say innovative or unique in the assignment brief. Yeah. Any last questions? Yeah, exactly. If you can draw from stuff that's already been done elsewhere, that's a great thing to do. We're definitely... And the other thing too is, as we were talking about earlier, there are reasons why you might want to be the marketer because it's cheaper. But you know, if you're looking at an educational program and you're not an educator and you can draw from what's been done in an educational context, for example, then it's useful to use others' expertise from other disciplines. So definitely worthwhile doing. Okay, we'll leave it there and I'll do all those things I promised and write a blog post about it once they're done. Cool. Thanks, guys. Ooh.